town of Fort McMurray is at the center of the Alberta oil sands, where a world-scale petroleum project extracts oil from a layer of oil-enriched sand beneath the Earth's surface. Source of the third largest oil reserves on the planet, the oil sands is the single largest economic driver in Canada. I've come to reconnect with Melina Laboucan-Massimo, who's leading a group of scientists and activists from the Nobel Women's Initiative on a tour of the oil sands.
Is my dad actually when he was about 5. He was hidden away from residential schools.
He was one of the children that grew up on the land. The community that I was born into is actually a pretty isolated community. There wasn't any paved roads when I was born.
These mines are the size of cities, so they're huge and they're really, really hard to fly over because they're just like, you can't believe how much land has been destroyed.
Indigenous communities are placed between a rock and a hard place. They're in one of the last remaining pristine ecosystems really in North America and the world. And yet our communities are being faced with this industrialization of the tar sands, and I think it's really impacting our communities in a way that we've never really seen before.
As the industry's leading lobby group, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers represents about 90% of crude oil and natural gas producers in the country.
Well, we could begin back when there were the dinosaurs and all of the plants that ended up coming down and being buried under the Rocky Mountains came up, and that's the real beginning. But let's skip several million years and get to the point where we actually discovered the oil sands themselves. But the First Nations people actually discovered the first part of the oil sands.
A lot of times they like to say this is the greener version, but you know what I've looked at is it actually uses 4 times as much natural gas, so more carbon emissions. And it actually, instead of having the surface tailing ponds, they actually bury the toxic waste. It's really scary.
And so it needed someone to come along and develop an idea of how to separate that heavy oil from the sand, leave the sand in the ground, and just use the oil for road paving purposes and eventually to turn it into products like we use every day, like gasoline, jet fuel.
This is something that hits really close to home. Where my family is, we had a really bad oil spill last year. And it was a multi-use pipeline, so it carried tar sands, it carried conventional, it carried diluent, and it was one of the biggest spills in Alberta's history. What happened was 4.5 million liters leaked into the muskeg. This is all oil, beaver dams, and it just went all the way down a corridor. I mean, I think I'm still personally recovering from that, how it really affected our family and our community, and just having to deal with the government and the company that wasn't giving information to the community. There was no emergency response plan. People are in the community. My auntie was texting me, why are people coughing? Why are people have dizziness, have burning eyes? Why do they feel nauseous?
In fact, if you look at how much oil in the oil sands is in the ground, it's actually 1.7 trillion barrels. Now, we don't expect to ever recover that, but you can see we expect today to recover about 10% of that. We could be producing that resource at today's level of production for over 400 years.
As I go back home more and more to visit my family, I see the destruction, and it really grieves me. It's something that it affects you so deeply into your core that I don't think it's something you can even really articulate of how that feels. It's like a part of you is dying along with the land. A lot of the sacrifice is on the backs of Indigenous peoples, and we need to say that we actually want a different future.
The Nobel Women's Initiative was established by 6 of the only 15 women to ever become Nobel laureates. Melina is guiding us through oil sands operations as we make our way to First Nations communities in the area.
I'm fighting against the proposed oil refineries in our reservation.
The Nobel Women's Group is continuing on to travel the route of the Northern Gateway Pipeline and study its social, cultural, and environmental footprint.
I think people need to come and see it firsthand to really know what the impact is. That's making a huge difference for me.
To come look and listen and learn from women on the ground who are affected by the expansion of the oil sands, and really to see the impacts on their lives and also the solutions they're proposing.
This is one of the things I want to learn on this trip, is how to make the voices heard, how to amplify those voices.
And make people aware of what's really happening.
The Fort McKay First Nation is about an hour's drive north of Fort McMurray, along a route known as the Highway of Death.
We've invited women.
Over the last 40 years, the Fort McKay First Nation has been gradually surrounded by expanding oil sands operations.
I am extremely concerned about the fate of our planet and climate change.
We've come to meet with band members to talk about their lives, their territory, and how they see the future.
In my own country, the United States, on trying to find renewable sources of energy. I'd love to hear what you all have to say about it.
Like seriously, we have nothing. Our air is gone, the noise around here sucks, the water's gone, the land is gone. You know, we don't have anything to live off in this area at all. We don't have anything to provide for our children, to teach them how to be natives. We're going to lose our culture altogether, completely.
Industry pits our families against each other, the government pits our families against each other, and it gets to the point where in my community, families don't even talk to each other.
And thus we see today over 1,700 Aboriginal employees and businesses in that region that are evolving from that, of which they've probably got a total in aggregate of, just a couple of years ago, $1.3 billion, just to the Aboriginal peoples who run those businesses. And that's provided them the opportunity to be able to benefit and understand how this affects them as well.
You won't believe what it's like to live here. Everything's been taken away from us by the oil companies. It's just the greed, you know, for money.
Selena Harp remembers a time before oil sands and has lived through all the changes the project has brought. Melina and I are visiting her to discuss the impact and how she sees the future.
Hear your story.
But a recent Alberta government decision to allow mining at a sacred lake has the band questioning their future.
Out the stocks, you know, it smells and people get headaches from it, they get nauseated. And the water, of course, we couldn't drink it, and of course we couldn't eat the fish after that from the river, Athabasca River.
A lot of our kids are got a lot of eczema and stuff in this community.
From the water?
From the water, yeah. We're not supposed to use tap water for anything. We still get water delivered to us once a week. It's going to be more and more. There's more oil companies coming. There's leases being bought left and right, and the government is giving the leases out.
Everybody has to open up their eyes and listen.
Well, we get our fish from Moose Lake, and now the oil companies are not very far away from there. So what's going to happen to the water, the lakes?
50 years down the road, what is it going to look like? What's the picture going to look like?
With the youth, are they learning the traditional ways?
Our youth are losing all their traditional way of life. Just go to work at the oil plants because they want to make money. I don't think a lot of them see a future for our earth.
When we go into an Aboriginal community, I mean, one of the things we do appreciate the uniqueness of the communities and their special rights they have in Canada and their strong ties to traditional ways. But on the other side, we also go into communities, they often talk about their youth not continuing education and even high suicide rates. And sometimes you look and say, well, is that because they don't see what the future is? So I think they may be having trouble trying to marry the traditional ways of life and then participating in a newer economy. So I think what we can do is provide training and jobs and hope for the young people.
Youth now are lost, and we all feel the same way. You know, we're just like lost people here. We lost our land, our livelihood, you know, our culture. Everything is gone now. You know, what do we do? Who do we turn to? And it's not our way, it's not for Native people. White man's world is not for us, put it that way.